And welcome to the Ben Emlyn Jones Show on Planet X Radio. Tune in for all the latest news, views and reviews from the world of government cover-ups, ghosts, UFOs, paranormal investigation, hidden knowledge, forbidden history and archaeology, chemtrails, and I might even throw in a brief word about hospital porters. Yes, I am Ben Emlyn Jones, hence the title of the show. And you may know me from other programmes on Planet X Radio. I have been on couple of the others now. I've contributed to them in a sort of minor capacity, but I'm pleased to say that the Planet X team have decided to give me my own show, which I'm very, very pleased about. Thank you very much. I'm very, very glad. I was actually on last Sunday's show with Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe and the other guests as well, and I haven't heard that one yet actually. I've not listened to it yet. I will get around to listening to it at some point. I do have a good excuse, though. I do promise you. I've actually been very, very busy, and I've even been away. I've spent a couple of days in Birmingham, so I haven't had a chance to get near the radio set since then. But I'll tell you what I've been doing. Actually, I've been having an interesting time. I've been doing a live lecture at Truth Juice Birmingham, and I want to thank Andy and Claire for all the hard work they did in organising that and having me on there, and I had a really, really good time. There's a lovely bunch of people, a really, really lovely community built up around Truth Juice Birmingham. I'm familiar with Truth Juice Hull, but I've never been to the Birmingham show before, least of all as a speaker. But it was really, really great, and I had some great. They really, really liked what I said in my lecture, and I had some great conversations with people. They asked some brilliant, brilliant questions during the question and answer session. It was really, really good. I was a bit nervous, actually, because I've done live shows before, but I've not done this particular subject. I've done several live shows on stage before, talking about energy politics, UFOs, my experience as a hospital porter, things like that. And I knew basically what I was doing. I could do it backwards, really. But I decided to branch out into a new subject, and the subject matter I wanted to talk about was only really in the preliminary stages. So it was a bit of a gamble, I thought. Going on stage doing something entirely new. But I needn't have worried. It all went perfectly. It all went absolutely perfectly. I was up there. I was like David Icke on stage, full of confidence, articulate and charismatic, or at least I hope I was anyway. My daughter actually. I've got a daughter who's an 18-year-old with attitude, I should tell you. And she says, "Oh, Dad, not that David Icke stuff again. I'm not in a mood for a David Icke lecture now." She's been saying this for many years. She's a complete skeptic. I'm glad she's got a mind of her own, actually. I wouldn't want to just go along with everything I say. But she just calls everything conspiratorial and paranormal. She calls it that David Icke stuff. It's a kind of generic term for everything I do. And everything we do, as a Planet X as well, generally does. I can actually tell you, she sometimes says I actually sound like David Icke when I'm talking. Well, I don't, okay? I do not sound like David Icke when I'm talking, and if you think I do, then it's just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. So, what I think is the best thing I can do this evening is actually talk about what I was actually talking about on stage at Truth Juice Birmingham yesterday. In fact, I think some films have been made of this, so at some point in the next couple of months you should get a chance to watch me in action as I rap to my adoring posse, Anyway, what I'm talking about, well, it's pretty scary stuff actually. It's very unnerving, worrying and frightening. So seriously, if there are any small children listening to the show, you might want to ask them to leave the room. I did a speech about zombies. Yes, I did. Now, what exactly is a zombie? Well, it's a good question. Well, we all have this idea in our head of what they are, but we don't know exactly where they come from or how they fit into the world we live in now, because they're much more than simply monsters from horror movies. Well, the actual zombie, it actually goes back to Africa. It's a figure from West African folklore. The word zombie comes from a Niger-Congo language spoken in Western Africa, and the word is Nzumbe. And basically, it was brought to the West via the slave trade and Haiti, where, of course, you get voodoo, and it became zombie in English. A zombie is actually a corpse that has been animated by mythical means, by a sorcerer, or what they call a bokor in West Africa. He would cast a spell and animate this corpse, as you've seen in some horror movies. The zombie would have no trace of any personality left of the deceased individual who had inhabited the body. It would be simply completely under the will of the bokor who animated it. And the bokor would actually keep the dead person's soul in a bottle. So this reminds you a little bit of the gin casks of sort of Arabic mythology, where you get the genie and the lamp kind of legend. But it's actually from West Africa, and that is basically where the concept of the zombie originates. Now, as I said, it's the zombie concept came to the West via Haiti. And in Haiti is where they have voodoo, and voodoo has a lot of bad images to it, because voodoo, if you think of voodoo, you think of people sticking pins in dolls and having skulls above their door and things like that, drinking blood, etc., etc. There's that James Bond film where they have, which is based around the theme of voodoo. In fact, the matter of fact, voodoo is actually a shamanic tradition which originated in Africa and has been adapted in Haiti. And as a matter of fact, it's not necessarily bad. It has both a bad and a good side, a left-hand path and a right-hand path. So it can be used. It's a power that can be used for good or bad, as with all of this kind of shamanic magic kind of thing. And it was pretty much unknown until about in the 1980s, really, when a guy called Wade Davis, who was a Canadian anthropologist and ethnopharmacologist. Repeat that back to me. He went to Haiti. He's a guy from Canada. He went to Haiti and he tried to investigate the zombie phenomenon, because there's a legend in Haiti of a man called Clavius Narcisse who was made a zombie after he died. He was buried, and everyone had a funeral. They were very sad. Anyway, a guy turned up looking exactly like him in his hometown, and the legend has said that a doctor went to examine him. He was completely he was just completely mindless. He wouldn't speak to anyone. He had his eyes just wide open and glazed over. A doctor went to examine him with a stethoscope and found out that he didn't have a heartbeat. He wasn't breathing. He had no blood pressure. This has never been confirmed, of course, and Wade Davis didn't believe this. What he said, zombies are not really dead. What they are is they're poisoned. The shaman, the voodoo priest or priestess, would actually blow this powder in their face. And this powder contains something called tetrodotoxin, which is a very highly dangerous poison, which comes from the pufferfish, and also some toads as well produce tetrodotoxin. It has no antidote. In a high enough dose, it will definitely kill you. In a lower dose, it puts someone in a trance-like state, like scopolamine. I don't know if you heard of scopolamine, another drug that originates from Peru that does that. And he wrote a book on this, Wade Davis, called The Serpent and the Rainbow in 1986, which was a bestseller, all about what he discovered. He managed to get a sample of this powder, took it home to Canada, checked it over. It contained all kinds of things, eyes of bats and toes of newts, but also this powder from the pufferfish. Anyway, in 1988, a horror film was made called The Serpent and the Rainbow, starring Bill Pullman as Wade Davis. It was supposedly based on his book, but you'll be glad to know it's actually a very, very loose adaptation. And if you watch the film, you'll know what I mean by being glad. It's an absolutely terrifying film. Now, in the 20th century, zombies became a big part of horror fiction. In the first time the word zombie was used in fiction was in 1929 in the novel The Magic Island by W.B. Seabrook. And the world's first zombie movie was White Zombie in 1932, which was directed by Victor Halperin and starred Bela Lugosi. But the definitive and seminal zombie movie, the one which created the idea of what we think zombies are in this world, and what brought it very much into popular culture, was a cult movie called Night of the Living Dead in 1968, which is by George A. Romero, and it's actually the first in a 6-film series which spans 42 years. The first sequel was in 1978. It was called Dawn of the Dead, and the 5th sequel, Survival of the Dead, was released in 2010. Very long running film series indeed. But it introduced the very popular concept of the zombie apocalypse. This is when there's a breakdown in a society as a result of a zombie attack, which spreads around like a disease, and it's become a very, very prolific kind of subgenre of dystopian and apocalyptic fiction. What happens is the zombies' assault on civilization causes it swamps the infrastructure of society. Military, law enforcement can't cope with it. There's a panicked collapse of society until there's only a few isolated pockets of survivors remaining, scavenging for food and supplies, constantly having to defend themselves from zombie attacks when they outnumber them many-fold. Dawn of the Dead was remade in 2004. Nowhere near as good, man. Nowhere near as good. Even though the zombies can actually run around and they're a lot more kind of agile and animated, but somehow that makes them less scary. I don't know why. Now, the zombie as we know it today, when you think of the word zombie, you're probably thinking of the zombies that were in The Night of the Living Dead and its sequels. That is the Romero-esque zombie. This is what you always associate with the meme of zombies. These are corpses that have been reanimated, like in the African folklore and voodoo, who are mindless and uncommunicative, but they walk around in a sort of in a very, very slow, shambling kind of fashion, very unsteady on their feet. They appear dazed and semi-conscious, and they just moan and grunt. They never speak. But they're very dangerous indeed, because they're constantly hungry to eat, and what they want to eat is the flesh of living humans. And they only have one objective, and that is to hunt us. And what's worse, if you survive a zombie attack, you become a zombie yourself. Now, in these films, the cause of the zombie outbreak is never revealed, but there's just a hint, and it's one line in the original Dawn of the Dead. It became the subtitle of the film. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. Now, I know, I felt the temperature drop a couple of degrees when I said that as well. Now, another form of zombie film is in sci-fi horror. That's very, very different. It's become quite popular, mostly post-2000. In this case, the viewer is told the cause of the zombie outbreak, and it is a sci-fi element. It's not supernatural. And the cause is a disease, like a virus or another kind of infectious agent. And good examples of these are I Am Legend, and 28 Days Later, which is a British film, and Resident Evil, which is actually a series of films. There's about 6 of them now, and they're actually the most interesting of all, and I'll come back to that later, actually, because that's a very important point. And even in these films, though, the zombies are sometimes like the Romero-esque classic. And they've even been on TV. Now, there's TV programs with zombies. I don't know how many of you saw Derren Brown's Apocalypse. This was odd because it was actually a reality TV show with zombies in. Derren Brown, I'm sure you'll know him. You've heard of him. He's very famous, actually. He's a stage hypnotist and mentalist. He does mind control, neuro-linguistic programming, hypnosis. He's very, very clever. I mean, he's got a lot of opinions I don't agree with, especially in terms of his views on the paranormal and spiritualism and ghosts. But there's no doubt he's a very, very talented man. But I'm not fond of him, and mostly because of this program. Derren Brown's Apocalypse is a kind of, if you've not seen it, how do I describe it? It's a kind of imagine a blend of The Truman Show, Night of the Living Dead, and Jeremy Kyle. You got it in your head? Yeah, what he did was, he took this guy, he didn't tell him what he was doing, but he took this guy called Stephen Brosnan, and he made him believe he was living in a zombie apocalypse. And the reason he did this was because he said, "This man is living a thoughtless existence without caring for the people around him. He's very unambitious, dispassionate, slothful and immature, an overgrown teenager. He doesn't clean up his room, makes his mother do all his washing up and cooking for him. He can't keep a job, he spends all his free time down the pub. And so Derren Brown thought the solution was to put him through a horrifying situation in which he thought his world had been destroyed and all his family were dead. I mean, ugh. That's pretty lousy, isn't it? Because he thought that it would do him, it was for his own good. It would cause him to develop courage and compassion and decisiveness. Oh my goodness me. I mean, I really think that's a very arrogant attitude, and it's very, very sadistic. And, you know, I mean, sure, okay, Stephen Brosnan, he was a bit of a slob. You've got to admit that. But does this mean he deserves to think he's living in a world where there's flesh-eating zombies everywhere, and they've gnawed his family down to the bone? I mean, ugh. And anyway, there's rumours that the entire event was staged and that Stephen Brosnan was just a stooge along with all the other people in it, which is something that doesn't surprise me because I actually spoke to a solicitor about this, and he told me that there's no way you could actually make a programme like that for real. It would just be illegally impossible, because you can't just take people and put them through these ordeals. I mean, the first thing this guy would do would go straight to the police and he'd report them for kidnapping and assault. So there you are. Anyway, enough of that. In the 2000s, there was this movie revival about zombies, and mostly sci-fi films, as I said. But we had the welcome return of George Romero. He went on to make 3 more films, the last 3 in his series on the living dead. And now, most recently, we had World War Z. I don't know how many of you saw that. You must remember the tagline. Daddy, what's martial law? You know, it represents this innocence of a young kid trapped in this world where there's a zombie apocalypse. And what's more, these zombies are they're a lot more powerful than the other. I mean, they're amazing. These you forget the ones in the remake of Dawn of the Dead. These were super zombies. They could run around at 100 miles an hour and jump 20 feet into the air. There's a lot of propaganda in it as well to do with the United Nations. The fact that the organisations like the Centre for Disease Control are mentioned, the World Health Organisation, and I'll be talking more about these organisations later, but they're portrayed as the heroes in this film. Anyway, there's also been a few spoofs. I don't know if you've seen it. Some of them are very good, but they've made a movie set at the Large Hadron Collider called Decay. And there's also a film called Warm Bodies that came out in the cinema a little while ago. And Shaun of the Dead, which is probably the best zom-com. There's just kind of like funny comedy films based around zombies. And of course, zombies have become so popular in culture that there are fans of the films, and they have zombie walks. This is like a parade through town centres where everyone dresses up as a zombie and acts like a zombie. And they have competitions for the best costume and the best acting and things like that. And there's some big zombie walks in Toronto and in places, I think in Berlin and Warsaw have big zombie walks, and there's one in London as well. Must be quite fun if you're into that sort of thing. Well, that's all I thought zombies were, and from all my life that's what I assumed they were. I had no reason to think of anything different. I had no reason to think they were anything different until about a year ago, when some information reached me which is really rather disturbing. And as I said above, you know, we've had a lot more zombie films in the last few years, but it doesn't explain what I discovered, and I discovered something very strange indeed. I actually saw an article in The Guardian entitled "When Zombies Attack, Bristol Ready for an Undead Invasion." And this was absolutely a remarkable article. It was written by Stephen Morris of The Guardian. And it was about, basically, what happened was, local authorities in all areas of the country have detailed emergency plans for natural disasters like floods, or man-made atrocities like terrorist attacks. But somebody wrote in to the council and asked if they'd had any plans for an invasion of zombies. And they sent a rather intriguing reply, which caused the person to contact The Guardian. The Guardian investigated via the Freedom of Information Act. And they found out that Bristol City Council has an official policy on what to do if there is a zombie apocalypse, or zombies start spreading. this is very, very interesting because the reply to the Guardian under FOIA said, please note that this document contains various redactions as it has been considered that some of the information contained therein must be censored for the purposes of safeguarding national security. It was marked top secret, the original file, and it said what it did was it suggested several areas of alert. An ambient zombie level meant business as usual, but be on the lookout for telltale signs. Enhanced activity level meant confirmed zombie attacks on the population. A major outbreak meant that there was zombie infection levels in excess of 1%, multiple sightings across the city, and zombie pandemic level concentrated outbreaks with infection levels over 30%. What's more, the report suggested different parts of the city which they thought were more at risk than others, and they said there were false positives in the Stokes Croft area. This is the city's bohemian quarter, which is very, very strange. And it said, to avoid widespread panic, staff are asked to listen for code words on the radio and television broadcast to warn them that a zombie attack is underway. It's very strange indeed. Under health and safety, the document urges staff to remember the correct zombie killing procedure, destroy the brain or fully connect the brainstem from the body through either a blunt force or head removal. And it said in the procurement section, the document claims cuffs, stun guns and protection suits are available to the staff, and that the Bristol City Council has staff that are fully qualified and accredited in zombie handling, and they have annual training courses. Now, I checked the date on this article. It was not April the 1st. It was the 7th of July 2011. So basically, the Bristol City Council has drawn up contingency plans, serious ones, for what would happen if a zombie's attacked. It's almost unbelievable. I mean, I've come across some weird things in my time, I can tell you, but this doesn't make sense. I mean, my first thought, this is some sort of joke, but the tone of the article just doesn't fit in with it. The fact that they had to use the Freedom of Information Act request. And I looked up Stephen Morris, the author of the article, and checked his bio out. And he's not a novelty columnist. He writes serious articles. He's a mainstream, serious professional journalist. He mostly writes about Wales, but he writes about other subjects as well, from England and other places. My next thought was the council was using some kind of code word. Zombie might refer to social disorder. You know, Stokes Croft, where they said there were false positives, was the scene of a riot a few years ago. When someone tried to open up a Tesco's, there was a riot because they thought it might harm small businesses. Another thought, it could be designed to disguise a secret operation, which I'll go into in a minute. But surely there can't be real zombies, can there? But it got worse. It got worse because shortly after that, I came across an article by the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention. Now, the Centre for Disease Control, CDC, was founded in 1946. Originally, it was just the Centre for Disease Control, but the P was added on later. It's a section of the US Department of Health and Human Services, and it also has global reach, and it sort of works on global projects. Like if you watch the movie Outbreak, that's a good introduction to what the CDC does. Now the prevention bit, like I say, was added on later, but the control and prevention are all Orwellianisms, and there's a guy called Dr. Len Horowitz who has exposed the CDC for what it is, and I'll be talking about that as well in a minute. But anyway, this article was written called Preparedness 101 Zombie Apocalypse. It uses a zombie apocalypse supposedly as a metaphor to raise public awareness of emergency preparedness. Now, the key figure in this strange affair is a man called Rear Admiral Dr. Ali S. Khan. Now, he is director of the CDC's Office of Public Health Preparedness and Response. And he wrote in his blog, take a zombie apocalypse, for example. That's right, I said zombie apocalypse. You may laugh now, but when it happens, you'll be glad you read this. And hey, maybe you'll even learn a thing or two about how to prepare for other emergencies. Right, possible pandemics, flesh-eating zombies, from horror films like Night of the Living Dead and the video game series Resident Evil. Dr. Khan reckons Americans prepare for natural disasters as they would prepare for ravenous monsters. Now, okay, I assumed this was a metaphor, and if it's a metaphor, it's made its point, and it can, you'd think it would stop there, but no, they carry on as if it was real. Now, Dr. Khan's blog includes precautionary advice about zombies. including the usual tips for preparing an emergency food kit, radio, torch, things like that, as well as emergency escape routes. But he says something like, things like, if zombies have started appearing on your doorstep, you need to get out fast. Plan your evacuation route. When zombies are hungry, they won't stop until they get food, i.e. living human flesh, which means you need to get out of town. Where would you go? Pick multiple routes you would take ahead of time, so the flesh eaters can't catch you. Now, this blog generated a lot of internet traffic. In fact, it had 30,000 hits on the first day it was published. The website crashed, and it was a very popular topic on Twitter. The tagline, if you're ready for a zombie apocalypse, then you're ready for any emergency. It got 12,000 followers that day. A week later, it was 1.2 million. Now, the CDC has gone further. They've announced a contest for the most creative and effective videos covering preparedness for a zombie apocalypse. In the video, they say they recommend people upload videos to their YouTube demonstrating on how they're preparing for a zombie outbreak. And almost as an afterthought, you know, it says, don't forget other emergency situations too, like floods or earthquakes or hurricanes or terrorist attacks. And in October of 2011, the CDC published a zombie pandemic graphic novella created by the fantasy artist Bob Hobbs. And it follows the story of a young couple trapped in a zombie apocalypse. And now the CDC is planning to run a survey on how many people have actually followed the tips. And you can actually buy merchandise. You can buy t-shirts and baseball caps and coffee mugs and beer mats, all based on this zombie apocalypse theme. Now, I'm baffled by this. I really am. The motives for the publication are not entirely clear. It's like they've said something extraordinary and included advice as if it's a possible real event. There are a few sentences in which they also remember to include other obviously very real threats like earthquakes, hurricanes and tornado, but then they just go back to discussing the zombies as a very feasible danger. Now, the original blog document by Dr. Khan is dated the 16th of May 2011, and Bristol City Council's document came out in July of that year, so this is an international policy. It's across the Atlantic. This is really grotesque and extreme. What's really going on? Is it some kind of psychological warfare against us? It surely can't mean real zombies. When if it's sort of like a psychological warfare operation, I can't see it working. It's too extreme. It's just too outlandish, and nearly everyone will laugh at it. You know, why don't they just put in the usual crap about, you know, Al-Qaeda operatives, you know, little guys with beards under your bed with Mr. Sheen cans full of bubonic plague. That to me is a more credible threat. Well, slightly more credible. Now, another theory is this is a cover story to launder secret operations. Now, this is a very, very popular idea in ufology. The idea is that governments actually encourage belief in various strange things like aliens or in zombies in this case in order to cover up another secret operation that they're doing and sort of like confuse people and to keep the secret that they're really doing. For instance, they'll encourage ideas of UFOs and alien spacecraft and flying saucers when they're carrying out tests on a new aviation project, a new spy plane or something. Now, I've addressed this many times when I've been talking about UFOs. It does not make sense. I know it's a very popular idea and some people have hung on it. They've written books about this, but it just doesn't fit. It's a very, very risky gambit if you're going to draw someone's attention towards something with the idea of deflecting it away. It's something that could backfire in any number of ways. It's rather like a spy walking down a street in an enemy country dressed as a clown. So he's undercover. Yeah, okay. He wouldn't look like a spy, so technically that's a disguise. But he would look like a clown, so people would be staring at him. It's a very, very odd thing. Now, I was mulling these questions over in my head, but then a new story came out. There were two stories. One in Harford County, Maryland, on the 20th of May 2012, and another one the very next day in Miami. And that is, there were several murders in which the victims were attacked as if zombies had done it. These were like cannibalistic attacks. They're really, really quite shocking. I actually played the audios of the news reports on stage last night, and I felt a bit guilty because some people were really upset by it. But I think it needs to be talked about. It really, really does. this was blamed on a bad batch of LSD, but I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, the police had to shoot a guy 4 times to get him off. I mean, of course, this is a feature of zombies as well. You can't, if you shoot them, it has no effect unless you shoot them through the head. Now that is right. One thing you've got to remember: that Harford County, Maryland, is very close to Fort Detrick, and Fort Detrick will come up again. I'll mention that again in a minute because that's very, very important. Now, one theory is that it's some kind of psychological operation, like I say, maybe not to cover anything up, but it could be they're using it as a kind of symbolic programming. I mean, they did this in the early Cold War with some of the stories about flying saucers. Like if you watch things like The Invaders, creatures from another planet, they're coming down to our Earth to make it their planet. Well, these flying saucers might as well have had red stars on them. I mean, it's just so obvious propaganda. It's allegorical communists. And today, of course, there are no communists to be worried about, but there's still a big elbow in the ribs here, you know. There are equivalents like terrorists, illegal immigrants, unemployed people, the homeless, any other sort of undesirable you particularly dislike, you could insert it in there, you know, and the zombie symbolises that. That's a possibility. So it's societal and cultural programming. And also, you know, the fear of pandemic, the pandemic flu, swine flu, bird flu, ostrich flu, badger flu, God knows what they'll come out with. God knows what they're going to come up with next. Duck-billed platypus flu? I'm sure there'll be a vaccine for it, and of course they'll come out whenever the shelf life of Tamiflu expires, which is a very interesting coincidence. But of course, you don't, except for the new Romero films, you don't get the supernatural zombies anymore. It's all sci-fi. It's all based on a virus, an infectious agent. It's scientifically explicable. However, you know, I mean, some parts of this just don't fit. You know, there were very, very real plans to deal with pandemics. And I mean, I know I've taken part in them because there's been drills at my hospital when I was a hospital porter. I might mention that a few times actually, because I was a hospital porter, and I'm very proud of being a hospital porter. And you know, I'm very, very sorry. I'm not, in a way. I mean, well, it's a big subject, but you know, I was sacked and everything, and I've spoken about that before, and I might talk about this on a future show. But I was sacked from my job as a hospital porter in suspicious circumstances. Anyway, as Ronnie Corbett used to say when he's sitting on his giant chair, on with the joke. When it's not a joke. Yeah, I mean, I carried out drills. There was a drill involving the emergency services, the armed forces, the police. It was a hypothetical scenario of a biological warfare attack on Oxford, and we all had to deal with it. Quite good fun, actually. No one was really scared, but that's a kind of example of what we're talking about. There was no need to make up stories about zombies. It was all very, 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 very clear what the problem was, and we addressed it as a real situation. So I don't know why there's these made-up stories about zombies coming out. I mean, I became more intuitively drawn to this theory, but I wasn't entirely sure. But then the National Geographic Daily News started talking about the possibility of a virus that was part rabies, part flu, which, as you can imagine, sounds really scary. I mean, rabies is a highly serious disease, but you can't catch it very easily. In fact, there were no deaths from rabies in the United States at all last year, only 2 infections. Flu, of course, is very common. It's very easy to catch, and if you combine the two, it's pretty horrible. Now, the idea that they interviewed somebody who said it's not possible to do that because nature just does not do that sort of thing. It doesn't combine 2 such different viruses. But then the thing about it is, who said nature is responsible for every virus? Now this brings us on to Dr. Len Horowitz, because Dr. Len Horowitz was saying that he's made a film called In Lies We Trust, which is a 2.5-hour documentary about the history of biological warfare. And it's sobering reading. I mean, he talks about how the US government and many other governments around the world decided to use germs, viruses and bacteria as weapons, and these got much more sophisticated as time went on. And they set up in 1943. They set up a place called Fort Detrick in Maryland, USA, to actually run this bacteriological warfare program. And Fort Detrick is only a short drive from Harford County, where one of the zombie attacks took place in 2012, in May 2012. So that's very, very great concern to me, a very odd coincidence. Now according to President Nixon, who was the most dishonest US president in modern history, and you can imagine that comes under some very stiff competition. In 1969, he announced that the American biological warfare program was over, and they weren't going to develop it anymore. But all they did was this was a lie. What he did was he changed the program from an offensive formation to a defensive formation. Now, in biological warfare, that in practical terms that means nothing. Nothing at all changed. And in fact, the budget increased the following year in 1970. And what's more, there was a document that came out called The Revolution in Military Affairs. This came out from the American War Colleges in 1970, saying that they were going to shift warfare from conventional battlefield warfare and nuclear weapons to sophisticated biological warfare, including genetically modified bacteria and cancer viruses. Now, that very same year, in 1970, the National Cancer Institute of America set up its headquarters in Fort Detrick. Now, the US anti-cancer, what was I called it? Sorry. The National Cancer Institute is there to research cures for cancer, supposedly, and sort of treatment for cancer. How very odd they would choose neighbours like the US biological warfare program. The Americans were not alone. Britain had a biological warfare program called Operation Vegetarian, which is a very odd name considering they actually slaughtered sheep in the experiments they did on it. They actually went to an island off the coast of Scotland called Grignard Island, where they left some sheep there and they put anthrax there, and the sheep died. The island was actually infected until 1990. It was only safe in 1990. There was also a strange event where between 1955 and 1961, millions of Americans were given the polio vaccine, which was infected, supposedly accidentally, with a virus called SV40. This supposedly there's a danger that this might cause cancer in humans. I mean, this is a controversial attitude, but the people who were fed this vaccine are now in adulthood, and in fact they're in old age, they're elderly people now, and they're coming down with all kinds of diseases, including not just cancers, but allergies, ALS, ME, all these various things, these sibilant acronyms that refer to these new diseases that no one's ever heard of before. It all gets a lot strange as well. Dr. Len Horowitz talks about, for instance, the Revolution in Military Affairs document also talks about engineering viruses that cause immunodeficiency. Now, what's very, very interesting about that is a company called Lytton Industries was involved in that project, and one of the guys who worked on it was someone called Dr. Robert Gallo. And what he did was he designed a hepatitis B vaccine, which was given to several groups of people, including male homosexuals in California in the 1970s. They were given this experimental hepatitis B vaccine. Anyway, in 1981, I think, that a new disease called AIDS was identified, caused by the HIV virus. And AIDS first emerged in the very same communities and groups of people that the hepatitis B vaccine was tested on a few years earlier by Robert Gallo. And Robert Gallo then went on to say he's the guy who discovered AIDS. How strange indeed that is. So what we're basically looking at here is a program to basically use disease as a weapon. This is what was in this Revolution in Military Affairs document, and it ties in with everything that's been happening. Have you ever wondered why these new diseases keep emerging? Cancers, viruses of various types, different kinds of flu. They just keep appearing out of nowhere. No one ever asks where they come from. Why is that? Now, what's interesting about the Revolution in Military Affairs was that it said that you could use biological weapons. One of the advantages was there's plausible deniability, and that is a long delay between infection and the emergence of the pathology. Previous bioweapons were just things like anthrax, which hit people immediately. You always knew where they came from. with a long incubation period for a virus. In the case of cancer viruses, it could be 10 years or more. It's quite possible that no one could ever prove where the cancers came from. The first thing you know about is when a population suddenly started developing these long-term chronic diseases very, very suddenly in vast numbers. And there'd be no way of knowing. It's very, very difficult to prove a causal link between that and some virus that was dropped from the sky in an aircraft. So that's a very, very it's a very, very sort of like convenient thing. You could actually, if you have this technology, you can wage war on an enemy country, and you don't need to declare war on them. You don't need to tell anyone about it. You can attack and defeat them in complete secrecy and in complete impunity. Now, it sounds horrible, doesn't it? It sounds really horrible. But then the thing is, the people behind this program are horrible. They're psychopaths. They have no feelings. And I think the zombie element is related to this, because I think it ties in. I mean, I don't have time to go into the details, but I do recommend you look up the work of Cliff Carnicum and Sophia Smallstorm on chemtrails, because they've tied in chemtrails with transhumanism. This is a program by which human bodies and the brain can be replaced with electronic alternatives, which are better, faster, longer lasting, things like that. Now, could it be possible that we're looking at this because more and more people around the world are now getting Morgellons disease, which is a very, very nasty condition where lesions appear on your skin which don't go away, and they're very hard to heal, or one heals, another one breaks out. And coming out, and what's more, these lesions have a discharge which contains these strange objects, like, well, some of them like fibres. Now, if you go to your doctors and complain you've got Morgellons disease, most doctors don't take it seriously. They just think it's hysteria. They say people are mentally ill, they're self-harming, it's psychosomatic sores on the skin. They don't take it seriously. And the fibres are just bits of cotton dressing that have been caught in the scab when the scab forms. But I mean, I've seen these things, they move. And what's more, you put them in a cigarette lighter, they don't burn. They're very, very tough. Now, Sophia Smallstorm calls them archaea. Normal life is eukarya, and these things are archaea. That means they're very, very tough, resilient life forms. They can live in volcanoes, they can live in nuclear reactors, things like that. Now, what we're looking at here, it could be that we're looking at a situation in which there's an attempt to transform human life into something different. On the one hand, you might have a eugenics program to create super better things, as in transhumanist cyborgs, and the byproduct, the side effects, are the zombies. Or maybe they want to make them into a slave race. Now, I said before I would discuss the film Resident Evil again. Now, the Resident Evil is, and there's about 6 Resident Evil movies. They star the main heroine of the films is someone called Alice, who's played by Mila Jovovich, and she plays an ordinary woman who's transformed by the same virus that creates zombies, but in her case she's not turned into a zombie, she's turned into a superhuman with superpowers. She's stronger, faster, more quick thinking than a normal person. She also develops psychic powers, clairvoyance, telekinesis. So in other words, she's what has become known as a super soldier, an enhanced human being. And I wonder how much the producers of these films know. That's the question. How much do they know? I mean, they just seem so... It's really quite uncanny and really quite chilling when you look at these things like this. You know, it really is. But I mean, I'm not sure what to make of it, because I mean, in this film as well, it gets even more crazy, because in this film, the Umbrella Corporation, these are the bad guys that create the zombie virus. They plan to turn the zombies, to tame the zombies and turn them into a slave race. It doesn't need food or drink, it just works and it does whatever it's told. Now, that's exactly the kind of mentality that's behind all this. Where this will go, I don't know. I mean, this is a theory, and as they say in Crime Watch, don't have nightmares. All right, I don't want you to be downhearted. I'm sorry to make the topic of my first Ben Emlyn Jones Show program something so grim and disturbing, but I I don't think we should lose heart. I feel optimistic. I think we're on the winning side here. For example, one of the reasons more and more people are getting Morgellons disease is actually your body's immune system rejecting these nanobots, these pseudo-life, these synthetic biology creatures. They're actually rejecting them. And the more people who get Morgellons, the more people who have been infected with these things are rejecting them. This means our immune system is not giving up. Our immune system is fighting back. And I think I want to talk a bit about Gandalf, because I love Gandalf from Lord of the Rings. J.R. Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings and created Gandalf, he knew some stuff. He knew a lot. He was in touch with very, very deep spiritual forces, that guy. And he said in the book, there are other forces at work in this world, Frodo, besides the will of evil. I quite agree, and I really think that guy, as I said, he was onto something. He was really onto something special in terms of a spiritual awakening of humanity. I think what the Illuminati are doing in terms of what they're doing with zombies and bio-warfare it's a last shot. I mean, they're just desperate, and it's not working, and it's not going to work. And I want you to finish listening to this program with hope in your hearts, not fear. Gandalf said as well, some believe it is only great power that can hold evil in check, but that's not what I have found. I have found that it is the small everyday deeds of ordinary folk that keep the darkness at bay. Small acts of kindness and love. Well said, Gandalf, because what it means is that we are not helpless. This is not me going through the end of humanity. This is me talking about an attack on us which we can defeat. I believe that sincerely. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't be doing this program. I'd go away and, I don't know, I'd go crazy. I'd go away and kill myself or something if I really thought that. I think we're going to look back on this, and it's going to be nasty. It's going to be a nasty thing to look back on. We're going to look back, though, as people who survived, and we grew through a spiritual awakening. We actually overcame this, and it's the forces that want to stop the spiritual awakening that are actually the ones who are on the losing side, and they know it, and they're getting desperate, and they're going to enormous lengths that they've never been to before, and they're jumping through more hoops than they've ever jumped through before, because they think they have to. So I'll leave you with that. But before I go, I want to talk about space weather. Now, if you listen to my other shows, like on CMR, you'll know that I do a space weather report quite regularly, and I'm very, very keen on space weather. It's a very, very interesting subject. And I've got some space weather for you today. Space weather is basically, well, it's weather. It's like a weather report, but it's stuff that happens. It's anything that happens in space that affects the surface of the Earth. And I think this is very, very important. And I'll be doing a space weather report every week, actually, on the Ben Emlyn Jones show. So to begin with, the moon. The phase of the moon is half at the moment. It rises at 2:33 in the afternoon, sets at 11:34 p.m. at night. So it's an evening moon. You might well see it if you've got a clear sky up there. Sunrise is 5:46 a.m. Sunset 8:30 p.m. So we're not in the middle of summer anymore. We're coming into late summer now. It's August. The evenings and mornings are drawing in, so it's not. But we still got a lot of nice clear evenings, so that's good. It's not going to be dark and gloomy and winterish just yet. Right, there's some sunspots on the sun, and sunspots are very important because sunspots can have an enormous effect on the Earth because they release radiation into forms of X-rays and gamma rays and things like that. Now, there's a few large clusters of sunspots across the southern hemisphere of the sun's disk. There's two in particular called AR-17 and AR-1817 and AR-1818, and they're looking menacing. They look like they might release what's called a solar flare or a coronal mass ejection, which is actually a massive explosion of radioactive particles which fly out into space, and they can hit planets, and when they hit the Earth they can cause problems. They can interfere with radio signals. They can cause things like I don't know, your TV picture to go fuzzy, phones to break down, sometimes electrical faults on the electric grid. They can cause blackouts. Now, no, that doesn't mean that's going to happen. I mean, major problems are quite rare, but I will keep you posted just in case. There's one tiny more singleton, just a tiny little sunspot on the northeastern limb of the sun. Now, I should say, actually, when I'm talking about sunspots, if you want to look at sunspots, right, please go to the websites, the astronomy websites, which can show you what the sun looks like. Do not try to look at the sun yourself. Please do not. Alright? The sun is extremely bright, and if you look at it, it can damage your eyes very badly. Alright? It can actually burn your retina and cause loss of sight. You can become blinded by looking at the sun. And any damage done is very, very difficult to repair. It very rarely heals completely, so please do not look at the sun with your own eyes. If you have the right equipment to do it, then do it so, but always make sure you do it with a trained person who knows what they're doing. On the subject of solar flares, we've had very little actually until Friday last week, when we had a flare that went into the lower C range. I mean, solar flares are in several categories. I mean, it's A, B, C, M, and X are the categories of solar flares, with X being the most powerful and A being the least powerful. Now, the sun's general activity is usually in the middle of the B range anyway, so a lower C class flare is very, very small indeed. And it took place on Friday evening. Now on Sunday activity picked up significantly, and it was AR 1818 and 1817 that did it. And the baseline, that is the general activity of the sun, it rose right to the top of the B range, and it became very choppy. And you could see it's sort of like jagging around, became unstable. And on Monday there was a flare into the lower M range, so it's a slightly bigger flare. And the trace has remained high and active and unstable ever since then, and there's constant small flares into the C range, so we're getting a bit of solar activity thanks to these sunspots. Now, what solar flares and CMEs, coronal mass ejections, cause is geomagnetic storms. This is basically where charged electrostatic activity in the Earth's atmosphere, or the high atmosphere, the ionosphere, actually rages, and you can't see these things. It's not like wind. But as I said, they cause electromagnetic disturbances on the Earth's surface. Now, these are predictions; they're not records. But there's a 30% chance of activity, a 15% chance of minor activity, of a minor storm, and 1% chance of a severe storm in the middle latitudes. That's nearer the equator, where these storms are less severe. But in the high latitudes, that's sort of in the upper temperate and polar regions, which is where Britain is. There's a 15% chance of activity, a 35% chance of a minor storm, and a 40% chance of a severe storm. So you could get a bit of crackling on your phone and things like that. I mean, it won't hurt you, but it probably won't cause any damage to the electric grid. But it could cause some interference on the internet and phone calls and things like that. Do be prepared for things like that. It won't last long, just until the storm's over. Now, there's been a lot of talk lately about the magnetic field reversal on the sun, and there's been a lot of scare stories going around Facebook about this. Now we all know about magnetic field reversal. Most of us have heard of magnetic field reversal on the Earth. It's just something that happens on average 3 times every million years. And now magnetic field reversals on the sun, though, happen every 11 years. Now, so if nothing went wrong 11 years ago, nothing's going to go wrong this time. Well, what it does is it signals the arrival of the solar maximum, which is where you get lots and lots of solar activity, flares, coronal mass ejections, and this does have an effect on the solar system. But like I said, it's something that happens every 11 years. It's nothing to worry about. Okay, please don't be concerned. If you hear horror stories about how it's the end is nigh, ignore them. They're a load of rubbish. Right, near-Earth asteroids. Now, there's a lot of objects out there in space, comets, asteroids, things like that, that sometimes do hit the Earth. Now, contrary to what you might believe, what you might see in things like Deep Impact and Armageddon and films like that, an asteroid hitting the Earth that can do any significant damage is very rare indeed. In fact, it happens only every few thousand years. And the good news is, you know, astronomers now have tracked pretty much of the biggest ones, which can really cause severe impact damage to the whole world. And truth of the matter is, most of them are staying well clear of us for at least the next few hundred years. So don't believe, you know, we're not going to, if you hear any horror stories about some asteroid that's about to impact, don't worry, it's probably just a news story about one that's going to pass particularly close. Alright, now we did have a very close pass on Friday. It was by an asteroid, just a lump of rock basically, floating in space, and it was called 2013 PS13, and it came very close. It came just a distance of 0.5 lunar distances. That means it's half the distance to the Earth that the Moon is. So for a short time the Moon was not the closest natural heavenly body to the Earth. Now the good news is it's only 46 feet across. And if it had hit the Earth, it probably wouldn't have even reached the ground. What it would have done is it would have made a nice loud pop in the atmosphere, and we get an attractive shooting star. That's probably all that would happen. Now, however, on August the 23rd, we are going to have a big one come past. It's 1999 CF9, which is 3,609 feet across, which is over a kilometre. Now, if that hit the Earth, we'd be in trouble. It would cause massive earthquakes, tsunamis, lots and lots of, it would cause a drop in temperature over the Earth for a few years, things like that. But the good news is it's going to pass a long way away. In fact, it's going to pass at 24.7 lunar distances. So it's going to be over 24 times as far away as the Moon is, and it's not going to come any closer. Please believe me, it's very easy to track where asteroids are going. We know where they're going. If they're going to hit the Earth, we would know. We know in advance if one was coming, and we probably get quite a number of years' notice. And there are ways and means of deflecting them if one is out there with our name on it. And I'll go into that in another program in the future. But it's a very interesting subject: asteroid defence. Now, I don't know how many of you went outside and saw the Perseid fireballs. The Perseid fireballs are now dying down a little bit, but I think it was I think it was Monday night. I think we got the most beautiful shower of these meteors, these little shooting stars. And what it is, the Earth is passing through the densest part of a comet's tail. Is the comet Swift-Tuttle, which passed the Earth in 1992. Every year the Earth just passes through the tail of this comet, and you get these debris. This debris falls down onto the Earth. It's produces these lovely effects in the sky. And again, completely safe. Just go out and enjoy them. Don't be worried. Now, the solar wind. The speed of the solar wind is basically charged particles from the sun go out like wind, and they hit the planets. Now, the speed of the solar wind and its density can have an effect on geomagnetic storms, and X-ray, the flares and the coronal mass ejections actually add to that wind. So, I mean, the solar wind speed at the moment is 275.5 miles per second. Now, that is very fast. It's usually about half that, which is still very fast, by wind speed, but it's solar wind. And its density is 62.282 particles per cubic inch, so it's quite dense as well. So it's quite thick, heavy, powerful wind coming our way, so it's going to blow heavily over the next few days. But like I said, it's not unusual. These sort of things happen all the time, so please do not be worried. And that is this week's space weather, so I hope you enjoyed that. And I hope you've enjoyed, actually, we're coming to the end of the programme now, I hope you've enjoyed this first ever programme of the Ben Emlyn Jones Show. I'm going to do some more. I'm hopefully doing these every week, where I'll go through some various subjects. I will try to choose a more cheerful subject than zombies next time. Alright, if you've got fed up with zombies. But I do hope you'll tune in next week, same time, same place, Planet X Radio. Learn all about the sort of things we're talking about: ghosts, UFOs, paranormal investigation, hidden knowledge, forbidden history and archaeology. And yes, I will bring up hospital porters at some point. And if you have any requests you'd like me to do, anything, subjects you particularly want me to cover, write into the Planet X website, and I'm sure they'll, whoever answers the emails will pass on your message to me, and I'll do my best to cover that. So, until next week, thank you very much for listening to the Ben Emlyn Jones Show on Planet X Radio. A figure from West African folklore. The word zombie comes from a Niger-Congo language spoken in Western Africa, and the word is Nzumbe. And basically, it was brought to the West via the slave trade and Haiti, where of course you get voodoo, and it became zombie in English. A zombie is actually a corpse that has been animated by mythical means, by a sorcerer, or what they call a bokur in West Africa. He would cast a spell and animate this corpse, as you've seen in some horror movies. The zombie would have no trace of any personality left of the deceased individual who had inhabited the body, it would be simply completely under the will of the Bokor who animated it. And the Bokor would actually keep the dead person's soul in a bottle. So this reminds you a little bit of the gin casks of sort of Arabic mythology, where you get the genie and the lamp kind of legend. But it's actually from West Africa, and that is basically where the concept of the zombie originates. Now, as I said, it's the zombie concept came to the West via Haiti, and in Haiti is where they have voodoo, and voodoo has a lot of bad images to it, because voodoo, if you think of voodoo, you think of people sticking pins in dolls and having skulls above their door and things like that, drinking blood, etc., etc. There's that James Bond film where they have, which is based around the theme of voodoo. In fact, as a matter of fact, voodoo is actually a shamanic tradition, which since then. But I'll tell you what I've been doing. Actually, I've been having an interesting time. I have been doing a live lecture at Truth Juice Birmingham, and I want to thank Andy and Claire for all the hard work they did in organising that, and having me on there. And I had a really, really good time. There's a lovely bunch of people. A really, really lovely community built up around Truth Juice Birmingham. I'm familiar with Truth Juice Hull, but I've never been to the Birmingham show before, least of all as a speaker. But it was really, really great, and I had some great. They really, really liked what I said in my lecture, and I had some great conversations with people. They asked some brilliant, brilliant questions during the question and answer session. It was really, really good. I was a bit nervous actually, because I've done live shows before, but I've not done this particular subject. I've done several live shows on stage before, talking about energy politics, UFOs, my experience as a hospital porter, things like that. And I knew basically what I was doing. I could do it backwards, really. But I decided to branch out into a new subject, and the subject matter I wanted to talk about was only really in the preliminary stages. So it was a bit of a gamble, I thought. Going on stage doing something entirely new. But I needn't have worried. It all went perfectly. It all went absolutely perfectly. I was up there. I was like David Icke on stage, full of confidence, articulate and charismatic. Or at least I hope I was, anyway. My daughter actually, she's. I've got a daughter who's an 18-year-old with attitude, I should tell you. And she says, "Oh, Dad, not that David Icke stuff again. I'm not in a mood for a David Icke lecture now." She's been saying this for many years. She's a complete skeptic. I'm glad she's got a mind of her own, actually. I wouldn't want to just go along with everything I say. But she just calls everything conspiratorial and paranormal. She calls it that David Icke stuff. It's a kind of generic term for everything I do and everything we do, as a Planet X as well generally does. Now I can actually tell you, she sometimes says I actually sound like David Icke when I'm talking. Well, I don't, okay? I do not sound like David Icke when I'm talking, and if you think I do, then it's just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. So, what I think is the best thing I can do this evening is actually talk about what I was actually talking about on stage at Truth Juice Birmingham yesterday. In fact, I think some films have been made of this, so at some point in the next couple of months you should get a chance to watch me in action as I rap to my adoring posse, Anyway, what I'm talking about, well, it's pretty scary stuff actually. It's very unnerving, worrying and frightening. So seriously, if there are any small children listening to this show, you might want to ask them to leave the room. I did a speech about zombies. Yes, I did. Now, what exactly is a zombie? Well, it's a good question. Well, we all have this idea in our head of what they are, but we don't know exactly where they come from or how they fit into the world we live in now, because they're much more than simply monsters from horror movies. Well, the actual zombie, it actually goes back to Africa. It's originated in Africa and has been adapted in Haiti. And as a matter of fact, it's not necessarily bad. It has both a bad and a good side, a left-hand path and a right-hand path. So it can be used. It's a power that can be used for good or bad, as with all of this kind of shamanic magic kind of thing. And it was pretty much unknown until about in the 1980s, really, when a guy called Wade Davis, who was a Canadian anthropologist and ethnopharmacologist, repeat that back to me. He went to Haiti. He's a guy from Canada. He went to Haiti and he tried to investigate the zombie phenomenon, because there's a legend in Haiti of a man called Clavius Narcisse, who was made a zombie after he died. He was buried, and everyone had a funeral. They were very sad. Anyway, a guy turned up looking exactly like him in his hometown, and the legend has said that a doctor went to examine him. He was completely he was just completely mindless. He wouldn't speak to anyone. He had his eyes just wide open and glazed over. A doctor went to examine him with a stethoscope and found out that he didn't have a heartbeat. He wasn't breathing. He had no blood pressure. This has never been confirmed, of course, and Wade Davis didn't believe this. What he said, zombies are not really dead. What they are is they're poisoned. The shaman, the voodoo priest or priestess, would actually blow this powder in their face. And this powder contains something called tetrodotoxin, which is a very highly dangerous poison, which comes from the pufferfish, and also some toads as well produce And welcome to the Ben Emlyn Jones Show on Planet X Radio. Tune in for all the latest news, views and reviews from the world of government cover-ups, ghosts, UFOs, paranormal investigation, hidden knowledge, forbidden history and archaeology, chemtrails, and I might even throw in a brief word about hospital porters. Yes, I am Ben Emlyn Jones, hence the title of the show. And you may know me from other programs on Planet X Radio. I have been on couple of the others now. I've contributed to them in a sort of minor capacity, but I'm pleased to say that the Planet X team have decided to give me my own show, which I'm very, very pleased about. Thank you very much. I'm very, very glad. I was actually on last Sunday's show with Professor Chandra Wickramasinghe and the other guests as well, and I haven't heard that one yet, actually. I've not listened to it yet. I will get around to listening to it at some point. I do have a good excuse, though, I do promise you. I've actually been very, very busy, and I've even been away. I've spent a couple of days in Birmingham, so I haven't had a chance to get near the radio set